Hi, Trent. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. We thought we'd get you on here and get you to talk about a few things about the HGC, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad the stuff I'm putting out there has people liking it.
So, Trent, I was wondering maybe just for our listeners who might not be familiar with you, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about your background and how you got involved in the esports industry.
Absolutely. In college, I played a lot of World of Warcraft, like a lot of World of Warcraft.
Didn't we all?
And yeah, days I will never get back and don't really regret it. But so once I got away from that, I was looking for something that was a little less, oh, it will take every second of all of my life. And so I found League of Legends, and in just wanting to get good at League of Legends, discovered that there was a professional scene for it, watched that religiously for several years, and ended up just wanting to get involved in that scene somehow. So I went to a bunch of different websites and started writing, just covering the LCS. Wound up working for Riot for 2 years on their journalism team, doing articles for the LCS. And then from there, discovered that Here's the Storm was coming out, and it had people from all these games that I liked, so I wanted to give it a try. And from there, started writing for Gosu Gamers and started my own blog, and have just kind of become an all-around. I just really, really like esports. And so right now, if you go to my blog, you'll see stuff about Hearthstone, Super Smash Brothers, Street Fighter, the new Dragon Ball fighting game that's coming out. And then I do a lot of writing for Heroes Hearth, covering Here's the Storm.
Oh man, it's
And
tremendous the amount of hype that new Dragon Ball game is getting. I'm really enthused that there's like already talk about an esports scene rising up.
We can absolutely have an entirely separate 30-minute conversation about why that game is incredible.
All right, opportunities for the future.
Yeah, it's real good.
so when you so what's your educational background and kind of how did you get started in your current position, which I heard described as an esports consultant? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I have a communications degree in public relations, and my dad has been in sales and motivational speaking and leadership skills training for my whole life. So I've absorbed a lot of presentation skills, public speaking skills, and writing ability from him and from just being good at English in school. So when I wanted to get into esports, the easiest way for me to do that, because I didn't have the internet to commit to being a pro gamer, I didn't have the knowledge necessarily and the technical skills to be a content creator in terms of like YouTube or shoutcasting or streaming. And so the skill that I did have was writing. And so I just wrote, and I forced people to, through just asking and emailing hundreds of people, eventually someone gave me an opportunity to write, and I was able to do that. And from covering so many different scenes so intimately, from writing for Riot, I got an opportunity to interview lots of players and coaches and managers and team owners. And I've kind of watched this second generation of esports rise up, because, we kind of had the first boom with Warcraft 3 and StarCraft. And then the LCS really brought us into this modern era of esports that we're in. And I've kind of watched all of these esports from CSGO to Dota 2 to Hearthstone to League all kind of form at once. And I've seen a lot of the things that work and things that don't work across those. And it's given me an ability to kind of consult for smaller organizations as well as do my own content, both on analysis for the games that I cover as well as the business side of things.
Gotcha. So I mean the particular news peg that's come up that made us think that we should give you a call is sort of the changes around ownership of spots in the HGC and conflict with sponsorships, specifically Roll20 and Team 12. I know you've put out at least one video talking about that. So in one of your videos, you talked about how you are available to look at contracts between sponsors and teams. And I'm wondering, what would you advise a team to do when they're looking for a sponsor? And what are the red flags that you're looking for in some of these contracts?
So there's a couple of different questions in there. In the HGC specifically, and we can talk a little bit more in detail in a minute about the ownership rules, so I won't get into that right this second, just to kind of focus on answering your question. But just kind of in esports, the things that you want to look for whenever someone comes to you, like if you're an open division team and some guy comes to you and says, hey, I've got this esports organization and you should sign with us and we're going to pay you a salary and you give us a cut of your prize money and we'll totally, do stuff for you once you get into the HGC. There's a couple of pretty common red flags to look for. Just kind of looking at the organization itself and how big it is. Does it have a team in a reputable esport? Are you the first team that organization has ever founded? Where did that organization come from? Are they also fellow players? Do they have a business background? Are they on LinkedIn somewhere where you can actually find them? And I think those sorts of things really help find a lot of those pitfalls where it doesn't happen nearly as much now, but the most common way that people get duped in esports is just some guy comes and says, I'm going to let you become a professional gamer. All you have to do is sign this contract. And people don't vet whether that person actually even has a company or has ever owned a company before or is a real person. So just kind of doing your research really will help catch a lot of the shady things that would be coming into Heroes of the Storm specifically, because the game is just not large enough to be attracting shady people that look reputable. Noventic and Playing Ducks, and King of Blades, these organizations that have had issues in Heroes of the Storm in the past, if you did a little bit of research, they kind of had questionable backgrounds before they got into Heroes. So any organization of that level, I would say just kind of be careful doing your research. When it comes to actual contract language, that's when it gets a little bit more tricky to give any specific advice other than just don't sign anything without a grown-up looking at it.
Right. You did mention, I think in one video at least, that you had helped negotiate out some bad clauses in a few contracts. Obviously, I'm not going to ask you which specific sponsors or teams these were, but I'm wondering what type of clause you would say is something that you've helped to remove in the past.
I coached an Infinite Crisis team back when that game existed, and we got signed by an organization that was not shady by any stretch of the imagination. They were wonderful. They're still an active organization that's in a lot of great games, but their contract just in esports, a lot of esports companies are just not big companies. They're somebody that's got a passion and a little bit of money, or they've won some prize money and have decided to turn that into a team. And so they just don't know a lot about how to write a contract. And so like one of the clauses in that contract was if you get kicked off of the team, you have to return all of the sponsor gear that we've sent you. So like if we gave you a computer, you have to give that back to us, which is not necessarily shady, but is not great. Yeah. It's like you gave this to us as a thing for being a sponsor. You're not even paying us a salary. Like we're going to go ahead and keep that. And so that's basically how that conversation went. I was like, look, logistically, that's insane. You're now getting into, well, what if that computer breaks? Now do you have to figure out monetary equivalent? There's just a lot of things that weren't really thought all the way through. And so I just sat down with the owner of the organization to say, okay, here's a hypothetical situation that could come about because of the way this is written. And I've seen a number of things like that where just the potential issues aren't all the way thought through in the specific language. And so you just kind of have to be careful. And that does take just kind of knowing a little bit about vocabulary and language to be able to spot some of those pitfalls. So you really do need to have either a lawyer or just someone that's got an education background to be able to spot those tricky bits of language that are either intentionally misleading or just not fully thought through.
So yeah, you brought up a good point there is, for those who can do you recommend that these teams get a lawyer and have one on retainer if possible? In case, we've had plenty of situations with teams where I swear if they had a lawyer, they would not be in the position that they're in. So how likely or how feasible is it for these teams to get a lawyer?
I mean, it's certainly possible. Lawyers are expensive, so a lot of teams aren't going to want to necessarily have one on retainer, like you say. But I think most people know someone who knows someone whose brother's cousin is a lawyer. So to just get someone to look over a contract, you should be able to find someone either as a favor or pretty cheap to look over an esports contract. And a lot of it just has to do with time. A lot of people just aren't willing to necessarily go back and forth and say, okay, I have these 3 questions. Let's talk about them. Okay, let's change the language, and then let's look at it again. Let my mom read over it. Okay, we have these questions. A lot of people just aren't used to negotiating and don't consider the fact that you can ask questions and you can say I'm not comfortable, and that doesn't mean you're going to lose the opportunity. And anyone that rushes you and pressures you into, look, we don't have time to go through all this stuff. If you want to be a pro gamer, you got to sign this right now. That's a pretty big red flag that maybe something's not 100%. Because if an organization wants you, they're going to be willing to negotiate and talk through those things. Whereas if they just want to take advantage of you, they're just going to want you to sign the thing, and they don't actually care about making sure that you're comfortable signing it. And that's what I found with the negotiations I've done in the past, is that the organization was willing. We went back 5 or 6 times back and forth, changing small things in the language because they wanted the team. And so they were willing to put up with that because they wanted to have the team.
So talking about Shady sponsors, there was one question I wanted to ask you as someone who's worked with both players and various sponsors and organizations. You hear these stories about sponsors that just up and stop paying their players, either for after one particular tournament or like for even long stretches of time. And I'm wondering if you can help me kind of get in the mindset of a sponsor that stops paying its players. Like, what is the rationale there? What is their goal? I've never understood that.
Well, I mean, it can be a number of things. There's some times where an organization is actually just a scam, and they are using the players to get sponsors, to get however much money they can, and they had no intention of paying the players in the first place. It could be that the organization is planning on paying the players utilizing revenue that never comes in or that's delayed. To use perfectly reasonable examples, the majority of esports, I think we focus too much on the actually gross shady people, and a lot of it is really more just esports is still really the Wild West, and a lot of this stuff is just not set in stone. We're still learning as we go with a lot of esports at this point. And so, for example, a lot of teams pay their smaller teams with the proceeds from another team. So, for example, Cloud9, when they had a Heroes of the Storm team, they didn't make any money from their Heroes of the Storm team. They never made a dime from the Heroes of the Storm team, except for maybe some small percentage of the prize money that the team won, but most of that went to the players. And I would imagine they were paying the players a salary, so they lost money having a Heroes of the Storm team.
Sure. So
they paid for that with the revenue from their Dota 2 team, their League of Legends team. And Cloud9's a very reputable organization with a very, very smart CEO. But if they were not a very, very savvy, super professional organization, they may have said, okay, we're going to fund the Heroes of the Storm team with the prize money we get from winning the LCS this year. And then something crazy happens and they end up getting 6th in the LCS, and all of a sudden they don't have that money. And now, after paying all of their other players and all of their other travel and paying for the players to travel to BlizzCon for Heroes of the Storm, at the end of that 3 months, they don't have any money, and they might have said to the players, okay, we can't pay you this month because we're still waiting for those funds to come in, but once those funds come in, we'll be able to pay you back for all the months we haven't paid you yet. And then you live on that promise for 3 or 4 months, and then they stop answering your Skype messages because they don't actually have the money. And so it just takes a long time before a group of players finds out that, it turns out we're never going to get paid. And by then, there's just only so much that can be done because, like we said before, lawyers are expensive and it's hard to, and player salaries are so small. All of your money that you would get back if you did fight that organization would be eaten up by legal fees. So it's just not even worth pursuing in most situations.
An all too familiar tale, for sure.
Yeah, but for the most part, like, esports has really come a long way. There are very, very few problematic organizations in big esports, and Heroes of the Storm is probably never going to run into that, into a King of Blades or a Naventic situation again because of the new ownership changes and things. So I do think that is in our past, and it's really only a concern for open division teams as the game gets bigger that might get taken advantage of, and smaller esports.
Yeah, I guess let's switch gears to talking about the new spot ownership situation. Sam, do you want to get us started?
So why do you think that Blizzard set up the spot ownership as they initially did? And then why did they change them?
So just to give a real quick background for anyone that hasn't, there's an hour-long episode of my YouTube show, Entry Level Esports, where I break down the entire ownership rules and how they've changed and answer some questions from Twitch and things like that. So if you really, really want to get into it, go watch that. I think it's pretty good. But just to give a real quick rundown, so the way that ownership worked in 2017 was every team qualified either by attending BlizzCon 2016 or by playing in those open qualifiers that they had at the end of 2016. And every team that qualified listed all 5 members of their roster and signed a deal with Blizzard that said, this is Team Dignitas, this is Team B-Step, this is Team Freedom. These 5 players represent this name. And the rule was, as long as you had 3 of those members still on your team at the end of the mid-season brawl, you kept your spot unless you got relegated through the Crucible. So that's why we saw what happened with B-Step, where 4 members of the team wanted to leave and go play on other teams. And so McIntyre wanted to stay and keep his spot, but because he didn't have 2 other original members of the team lost their spot, and McIntyre had to go to the open division and qualify with Heroes Hearth. And that's how it was for Lag F2, Lag Force. Every player wanted to go play for a different team, and so the team Lag Force lost their spot because it was under the old ownership rules where you had to have 3 original members or 3 members that started that phase. In 2018, the rule now is that the players have to assign an organizational body, some sort of company, to represent and own their spot. So for the teams that had sponsors prior to 2017, Team Liquid, Dignitas, Fnatic, Freedom, sort of, and Gale Force and Tempo, those organizations that have been established in Heroes of the Storm before the HGC own their spot outright. Their spot was given to them by Blizzard. The players no longer own those spots. The other teams had to work out a deal with their sponsor to give their sponsor ownership of that spot. So Space Station Gaming owns their spot. Heroes Hearth owns their spot. The players no longer have ownership of that spot. And what that means now is that no matter what happens to your roster, if all 5 players decide they want to go play on other teams, if Gale Force completely implodes this season and all 5 members want to go play for other teams and Michael Udall finally decides he does actually want to retire, Gale Force is still going to keep their spot. They're just going to have to find 5 more players to play in that spot.
Actually, that led me on to another question, and I think you're the perfect person to ask. What's your thoughts on Michael Udall's kind of, because actually that team, Gale Force, is my favorite. And I found it weird when he said he was retiring. And then when Gale Force worked out their sponsorship stuff, he came back.
So what happened there, I have not spoken to Michael Udall directly, and I don't want to speak for him and say that this is exactly what happened, but if you look at the way the rules worked, to have your spot in 2018, you had to be a legal team under the 2017 rules, which after the midseason brawl, they changed it to you had to have 2 original members on the roster in order to keep your spot. So Lag Force wasn't able to keep 2 original members, so they lost their spot. As soon as BlizzCon was over, K1 and CAF immediately bailed and went to form Old Gods with Zuna. And Fan immediately pieced out to go play with his roommate June and Cattle and Lau in Tempo Storm. And Michael retired. So that left Akaface exactly in the same spot as where McIntyre was at the beginning of 2017. So basically, Michael may have been planning to come back all along regardless, but basically had Michael not come back, Gale Force would have either had to bring back K1 and Caffeine or Fan in order to keep their spot going into 2018 because they had to have 2 original members. So they had Akaface and they were required to bring somebody else back in order to legally have their spot going into the 2018 season.
Okay, and just to talk a little bit more about the teams now and everything, do you kind of have any kind of favorite teams in each region, teams that you'll think will be underdogs this year, the team to beat this year? What's kind of your rundown on your favorite teams?
The ones that I really like, I mean, I'm obviously very partial to Team 12, formerly Roll20. They were great to work with in the player interviews I got to do. I know their manager fairly well. I just like all of the players. And Team 8, the origin of Team 8, where Roll20 came from, is a League of Legends team that was my favorite League of Legends team. So I just, as soon as Team 8 became a thing, I had an affinity for them. So that's far and away my favorite team. Outside of that, as a writer in the scene who talks to a lot of players, I kind of just want everyone to be successful so that everybody gets to keep their job. It's sort of weird. I just want good games, and I don't really care who they come from as long as the players that I like and that like me work together and are able to keep their jobs. In terms of dark horses, I think one that a lot of people are sleeping on that aren't paying super close attention is Heroes Hearth. There's a lot of people that have them in their top 4 as analysts, and I've seen a lot of people kind of laugh at those analysts for putting that out. That team's very, very good. BBJ and Ishbu are well-respected, pure support and tank players, and I've spoken before about how important having a real tank player is to the success of a Heroes of the Storm team. You look at every single team that's been successful in Heroes of the Storm, they have a genuine tank player and not somebody that role swapped in because they got rid of their tank player. And Crone and McIntyre are really, really good.
Okay, yeah, and what do you think about teams from Europe, teams from North America, and their kind of likelihood of beating the really strong MVP Black Korean or any of the Korean teams?
KSV Black now.
Yeah,
KSV Black, sorry.
So Korea is, in every game that Korea decides they care about, they dominate. That's just a thing that happens. So as somebody that's watched a lot of StarCraft and League of Legends, I don't even concern myself with beating Korea. The fact that Europe has been able to be as close to Korea as it has in the last 2 years is kind of insane, because as a League of Legends fan, we're used to Korea versus Korea in the World Championship finals every single year since season 3, with 1 year where China showed up. But since Korea has gotten their act together, it's been Korea versus Korea every single time. So Korea, South Korea is just an esports mecca. Their infrastructure is better, the expectations are better, the talent is better. Korea is just always going to dominate. I guess in terms of being able to keep up and for North America to challenge Europe and at least be relevant internationally, I think you're going to see that elevate significantly this year, because the rosters are way stronger. The depth of North America is better than it's ever been. We have more legitimate organizations coming into the scene to encourage being able to pay for coaches, being able to pay for analysts, being able to bring those expectations in. And hopefully this year teams will actually boot camp in Korea and have the money to be able to boot camp in Korea. Because if you notice, Dignitas, Expert, Fnatic, I know at least Dignitas and Fnatic boot camped in Korea before BlizzCon both of the last 2 years and did reasonably well at both of those events. And that's the one thing we still haven't seen North America ever do. And I don't think North America will ever be relevant at a BlizzCon until they actually boot camp in Korea.
And I've talked a lot about this to Kevin and Aiden, our other co-host. And one of the things I think hurts esports all around, and with sponsors or, just league marketing, things like that, is the visibility of the players. And for them to have the chance to really shine as a personality and a player. So in sports like basketball or baseball, players are visible, and you kind of get this link with them, this kind of bond with them through seeing them play and being able to meet them, but also just the physically playing the game and having people be able to see you play. And esports has that problem because you're not watching them, really. You're watching what they're doing on a screen. And so what do you think we can do as an industry to kind of overcome that slight handicap that we have in terms of player visibility?
I think there's a lot of really good work that's been done in other games. I think being a Heroes of the Storm fan, that feels far worse than it is in the majority of the industry, because we do such a catastrophically bad job of it compared to other esports. So for me, it's looking at what other games have done. And the biggest thing is just having more LANs, because like you say, being able to see the players themselves, it just puts them in your brain. It makes them real humans. It makes you actually care about the human stories that are happening in esports, because ultimately that's what makes esports so great, is that it's human stories that are more interesting than stories that are on TV. It's the drive, it's the drama, the rivalries. Those are the things that make sports great. It's not watching high-level play, because most people can't even understand high-level play.
Right.
The average fan can't tell. The average fan can't tell that Zuna is good, and it's fascinating to watch that dichotomy. Like you talk to any pro player or any serious analyst, and they'll tell you that Zuna is one of the most mechanically gifted players in North America and has been for the last 3 years. You talk to any average fan and they're like, oh, he just feeds all the time. He's garbage. He should have been kicked out of the league 2 years ago.
Yeah. As far as player visibility, I have to give it, because I think he's a good player, but also I have to give it to Michael Udall in the sense that he has been visible as a player. He has kind of created this, not gimmick, but personality for himself. And this kind of, this kind of persona, I guess I'll call it. Like when he came back, he made this little cheeky little video that I actually quite enjoyed. And do you think more players need to do things like that kind of make them stand out as a personality?
So I think this is one of the things with MOBA games and computer games specifically that's a bit more of a challenge, because you don't find this in fighting games. And it's one of the things that I've learned covering the fighting game community as much as I have, is that in the fighting game community, nobody is the awkward nerd that didn't get along with people in high school. Most people in the fighting game community are really confident, are really outgoing, have a lot of friends and like to go out and do things. And a lot of that comes from the fighting game community has its roots in arcades. So if you wanted to go play a fighting game, you had to go out and be with people and stand in a line and sit next to the person that you were competing against. And so it created this atmosphere of we're actual people, we get together, we communicate with each other, we have fun together, whereas computer games are very, very isolated. I mean, even the HGC, most of the players don't live even in the same state as each other on the same team. So it's much more segregated, it's much more isolated, it's much harder for you to kind of get used to being a personality. And that's why Michael Udall in Heroes has risen so much, is because he is naturally a good-looking, charismatic dude. And that's why we've latched onto him and why he's been able to make such a name for himself, is because he's naturally that kind of person. Whereas I think more people that are attracted to MOBA games are people who like to sit in front of a computer and by that token aren't going out and talking to lots of people and engaging in social situations a lot. And so just the person that's in MOBAs and in StarCraft and things like that is just a less charismatic person. And so you do have to do a little bit more to draw out those human stories and get them on stream doing interesting things. And this is something that League of Legends did very, very well in the early days, was they had lots of lands and they showed the people on screen a lot of the time, and they told you why those people were cool, not just why the play that they were doing was cool. And I think I've talked about it a number of times, but I like bringing it up for Here's the Storm people, because I feel like a lot of people in Heroes, this is the first esport they've ever followed. But if you go online and you type in League of Legends running video, there's a video that they did to tease the League of Legends, the LCS starting. And if you watch it and you've never watched League of Legends before, you will think it's the dumbest video you've ever seen, because it's literally just all of the LCS pros running around in a warehouse, like just sprinting, like they're racing each other through an abandoned warehouse. And that's the entire video. There's no dialogue, there's no anything. They just run up and down some stairs and run really fast in front of the camera. And then it says LCS coming in March.
Oh, that's awesome.
Is this like an art piece?
It's just a hype thing. But the reason that it worked in League of Legends and the reason that that video wouldn't work in Here's the Storm right now is because you knew every single player in that video by their face. You look at that video and you know every single person in that video, and you get excited because you're seeing them be serious and be together and be running towards something, and you can feel the drama and the emotion of that because you're connected to that person. You watch, watching the HGC introduction video, I don't know every single one of those players by face because they haven't been in front of me enough. And in Here's the Storm, we get the player interview at the end of each HGC match, but we really need to do more to put every player's face in front of the fans so that they learn who these people are more than they just learn what they play.
Now, this connects to something that I wanted to ask you about, which was you've talked about how growing the HGC is, in addition to being Blizzard's responsibility, it's the responsibility of the players and the fans in terms of, for the players making themselves more visible, saying interesting things in interviews and on Twitter, the fans buying merchandise and watching the HGC streams. So these are things you talked about as being what we're supposed to be doing. Do you think that this is something that players and fans aren't currently doing? Is this something that you think that Heroes of the Storm is lacking, and that's partially why it's in the position it's in?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the players themselves, and I think many of them would even admit it, early on in Heroes of the Storm just did an awful job of promoting themselves. They were not interesting. They still have horrible metrics on Twitter. Many of them, they don't take lots of selfies. They've made fun of me for telling them they need to take more selfies, but it works. And they just really did not develop personalities. And that's one of the reasons, going back to League of Legends, why TSM became so popular, was because from day one, they were putting out videos of them playing on microphones so that you got to know their personalities. They moved into a gaming house in season 2 so that they could start putting out videos of Dyrus burning the house down by putting a hot pocket in the microwave for too long, and doing all of these things where they were doing vlogs and they had game cribs, and you just got to know them as people far more than you've gotten to know anyone except Michael Udall in Heroes of the Storm. So I absolutely think there's a component of it that the players need to do more to make the community aware that they are actual humans. And one of the ways to do that is to take more selfies and to tweet more at other people. And they're getting way better at it. But that is absolutely something that they need to do. And then as fans, I think we need to do a much better job of conveying that the HGC is interesting and that it's not just about the play, because the interesting thing about Heroes of the Storm is that when Heroes of the Storm was created, it's the same problem that happened in Hearthstone. It is a really, really fun game that does not look competitive. And so it attracts a group of people that are less interested in being competitive. And often the reason that people get interested in esports on the surface level is to learn to be better at the game. And an overwhelming majority of players in Heroes of the Storm don't actually care about getting better. They play quick match, they click on Butcher, they run down the lane, and then they lose and they queue for the next game as Butcher, unless they have a quest to play support. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's an entire legitimate way to play a video game, but it's not a way to play a video game that's conducive to an esport. And so I think as fans, as content creators, as people that are in this scene that are passionate about the esports, we need to do two things. We need to, one, do a better job of conveying that the game is better when played at a competitive level. It's better when played with friends. It's better when played with draft. It's better when played when considering your composition based on the map. That is a more fun way to play Heroes of the Storm than quick match. And that if you're playing Heroes of the Storm, it's actually a phenomenally deep game with really interesting characters, and the more you put into it, the more you will get out of it. And by that same token, we also have to do a better job of introducing casual fans to the human drama of the LCS and to the interesting people that they'll want to connect with, and showing them funny videos of Fnatic screwing around and, you know, how good-looking Michael Udall is and all of these things. Like, we just have to do a better job of highlighting the two reasons that esports are interesting. You're going to get better at the game, and you're going to connect emotionally with some amazing people and some incredibly human stories that are more real than anything you're going to get watching Netflix.
Let's see here.
Well, there was a couple questions I wanted to ask, which is...
Sure, go ahead.
You talked about quick match, how people sort of jump in and they play the character that they want to play, and you were saying that we need to do a better job showing the depth and complexity and the better way that Heroes is played. Do you buy into that argument that quick match is actually detrimental to the future of the game? Because a lot of people will make that argument.
Oh, I actually wrote a super clickbaity article on Heroes Hearth that was basically titled "Quick Match Made the Entire Heroes Community Stupid." I think quick match is horrible. I'm one of the horrible people that would be absolutely voting in favor of it being completely removed from the game. They can't do that. And it's not fair to the people that do enjoy that, because, again, that's an entirely valid way to play. There's a lot of people that play League of Legends and only play versus bots or only play in ARAM. Those are all completely legitimate ways to enjoy a game. I think the specific problem with Heroes of the Storm is that the entry-level experience of Heroes of the Storm does absolutely nothing to even open your mind to the possibility that the game has depth, because you do not get to pick the map before you pick your hero. You do not get to look at the other heroes that are being picked before you lock yours in. There's nothing in that mode that conveys to you the things that make Heroes such a wonderfully beautiful, high-level game, because so much of that is in the draft and in the compositions and in the map-specific things that you cannot do in Quick Match. So it's no fault of a player who only plays Quick Match, because there's nothing in that mode that even tells you that the game has depth. And Blizzard spent a lot of their time at the beginning of the game telling people that it wasn't a MOBA, that it wasn't like League of Legends. It attracted people that were disenfranchised with League of Legends, that want a different experience. And so the person that plays Heroes of the Storm overwhelmingly is not a person that's attracted to the things that made League of Legends such a successful competitive game, that make Dota 2 such a successful competitive game, that makes Street Fighter so attractive to a competitive player. So it's much, much harder, because of Quick Match and because of the kind of player that Quick Match attracts, to get that person to take the leap into unranked draft, into Hero League, into Team League, because that's not the experience they're looking for when they play a video game.
So here's kind of a maybe a strange question is, how long do you think we've got to figure this whole thing out? What do you think is kind of the lifespan of an esport like Heroes of the Storm?
Heroes is interesting because it's owned by Blizzard, and the game itself is fairly successful. There's actually a lot of people that play the game. It's pretty high on Twitch. It's not doing amazing when you compare it to the other MOBAs, but Heroes is a fairly successful video game. There's a lot of people that play it. There's a lot of people on Reddit. It's a good game. It's a very successful game. And as a result, the game's not going anywhere. It's not like Infinite Crisis, where it got shut down in beta. It's not like, Street Fighter 4, where Street Fighter 5 came out and killed the game. And it's in a genre that's still going very, very strong. And you're going to have players that get older and get tired of grinding Dota 2 and are looking for a more casual experience. And so they think Heroes of the Storm is the casual MOBA, so they come check it out. You're going to have cross promotions with Overwatch that bring players over that are like, oh, this game's actually fun, and then stick around, because we've seen that happen over and over again. So I don't think Heroes of the Storm, the video game, is going to go anywhere anytime soon. The question will be, how long is Blizzard willing to lose money on the esports side of it not growing to the place where it's sustainable? And that could be infinite. They just like esports, and they want all of their games to have esports, because they're mad that they didn't get the money when StarCraft became famous. So, and Overwatch League is looking to be a phenomenal success with all of the metrics that we had, and the fact that Toyota just signed a partnership with it. So Blizzard's doing very well. They can afford to lose money every year on Heroes of the Storm esports. So I'm not worried about that side of it. I'm more worried about just the players losing interest, not being able to draw new players into the competitive scene. And I think there's still a lot that can be done from our side and from, shows, podcasts, getting more people focused on the competitive side, drawing more people over there, getting together groups of players and showing them that, the way to play this game is in draft modes, is in groups. This is where the game really shines, and getting players to not be satisfied with quick matches their gaming experience, because as soon as players have a desire to get better, they will naturally care more about the competitive scene, and then we'll naturally get more viewers. And then we do genuinely have great personalities. So if we introduce those people to those personalities, they'll become lifelong esports fans.
I don't know how many
Yeah.
Nova Murky matches you need to do in quick match before you realize that there's a better way.
Some people are just broken, dude.
And I okay, that threw me off. Anyway, yeah, I agree with you because I think Heroes had this great potential to be, the more watchable esport that maybe League of Legends and Dota. Like, they're longer games, there's a solo gold grind, solo level grind, items, whatever. And I thought that Heroes did a really good job of cutting out all of those extra things and focusing on team fights, which is what people find interesting. And, quick objectives, things like that, shorter matches, so you don't have to keep people's attention as long.
The pacing is
always
just way better.
Exactly, the pacing is better. And I'm just wondering, like, they had such great bones to make this an awesome esport because it did in my opinion, it improved upon MOBAs that were already there. And to me, it was easier for an audience to digest than, say, League of Legends was. So the fact that it didn't translate frustrates me, or maybe it is partially that Blizzard didn't put as much logistics into this one and as much capital into this one as they did with, say, Overwatch, because, like you said, like Toyota's getting involved in Overwatch. Kraft, the company, is now involved in Overwatch. And so they've got big names there. Where the heck are our big names?
Well, there's a couple of things. So there's a couple of things in that question. One is Blizzard's philosophy as a company is to make really great video games. They have never once in their entire history set out to make a competitive video game. StarCraft was not that. World of Warcraft was not that. Hearthstone is not that. Overwatch is not that. Overwatch didn't even have a competitive mode until like right before release. It has never been Blizzard's policy or goal to make a good competitive video game. They just don't do that in any of their games. That said, their games are really popular and people like competing in video games, so competitive scenes form around their games, and they have a legacy of being the company that started esports with the two games that I guess they actually tried to make competitive or accidentally were really competitive in Warcraft 3 and StarCraft. And then you look at just popularity. I mean, Hearthstone is an awful esport. The game is stupid.
Thank you.
I love playing Hearthstone. It's not a competitive game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a more competitive card game than Hearthstone.
Right, let's not get crazy here.
Oh, have you played Yu-Gi-Oh? It's actually a really good game.
Oh, sure. I've got Duel Links on my phone.
Kevin is our resident Magic player, so...
Oh yeah, so you hate Hearthstone. I feel your pain very much.
Hey, I traveled to LA to cover a Hearthstone tournament recently. I've met a lot of good people. I wouldn't say I hate the whole ecosystem.
They're not evil. They're just wrong. I adore Magic the Gathering. It's the greatest card game, and comparing it to Hearthstone, there is no comparison. But Hearthstone esports do pretty well just because the game is so popular. People just want content. And Overwatch is basically the same thing. It's not a better competitive game than Counter-Strike. It's not even a better competitive game than Paladins. I wrote an article for HTC Esports comparing the two, and Paladins, if you really take away your bias and you look at the two games as they're designed for competitive, the competitive mode of Paladins is a more balanced, more interesting, more compelling competitive mode for an esport than anything that Overwatch has to offer. But Overwatch sold like 60 million copies, so it gets the Overwatch League. That's really what it boils down to. There is a direct proportion between the popularity of a video game and the success of its esport. It doesn't have to be the most high-level game. Nobody watched StarCraft 2, even though it's still one of the most complex and most incredible esports. Very few people watch Super Smash Bros. Melee compared to other esports, even though it's possibly the most technical and most beautiful esport to watch. Very few people watch Guilty Gear, and that is one of the hardest fighting games to master because those games aren't as popular as other video games. So you have to have a very popular video game, and then you have to have a player base that cares about improving in your video game. And those are really the two things that make a successful esport beyond anything else. And then the esports that sustain also happen to be good games with a competitive structure.
Oh man, I haven't heard the name Guilty Gear since we interviewed Lord Knight. I don't think I've heard that game's name since then. And Kevin,
you're gonna hear it a lot when Dragon Ball comes out because it's made by the same people.
Oh really? Yeah. And then Kevin's favorite, he always managed to bring on as much as he could, was Hungry Box from Melee.
Oh.
And
Hungry Box is my dude.
I love everything that you are saying and have said for the past 3 minutes.
Yeah, Evo 2016 was the first Evo I ever watched, so Hungry Box has a very special place in my heart.
Oh, it was majestic.
Mm-hmm. We lost like half of your listeners right then. I apologize.
Well, no, that's all right.
They weren't the listeners we wanted.
Yeah, they're not the ones we need. So, okay. Before we get too distracted with other random esports that I'm sure we could talk about for hours, what advice would you give to someone considering a career in Heroes, or would you suggest they don't do so at all?
Give me that one more time.
So what I'm asking is, what advice would you give to someone who's considering a career in Heroes esports, whether that be a caster or a journalist or a player or whatever? Or would you suggest that they don't?
Heroes is not a big enough esport to sustain very many careers at this point. Basically everything in esports needs to be a passion. If you're going to get into esports, you have to be okay with never making any significant money from it. And this is why I got so upset with the people that were attacking Team 12 over recruiting an analyst and not paying him. I did a lot of stuff for free for 5 years before I ever made any meaningful money in esports. I still don't make my full-time living. I have a full-time job and do everything that you see me do on the side because I just love esports and I'm determined to show the Heroes community how incredible these players are. And that's where I get my passion from. And even if I don't ever make a full-time living from doing that, I'm going to keep doing it because it's my passion. And just like in traditional sports, the vast majority of people are never going to make a living from it. So you really do have to be...
Now that surprises me.
You have to do it out of passion first.
Sam and I, we got our full-time wages from this podcast, so we live very comfortably.
Oh, you've got those podcast
money.
mansions?
Oh yeah.
You got those YouTube mansions that everybody has? Yeah. Now, if I will say, if you are going to pursue a career in esports, there's a couple of things that you can do. One is be a very good player. Even if you don't ever make it to the professional scene, being a very good player will get you better opportunities as a caster, better opportunities as a coach or analyst, better opportunities to be an observer. You just get connected with the scene if you're a grandmaster level player. So if you're a good player, that helps. If you're not a good player, then focus on providing something for the scene that nobody else does. Focus on finding something that the scene needs that isn't being provided. Focus on skills that are transferable. If you can do video editing or graphic design or any of those things that an esports organization could use across multiple games, you will be much more attractive to an organization because most organizations are multi-game. So if they can hire one person to cover all of their games, they're going to be much more happy than if they have to hire one person for every game because that gets expensive. So yeah, I would say if you're talking about Heroes of the Storm specifically, either try to be a pro player, commit yourself for a year to trying to be a pro player, or do it out of passion. And if money comes, awesome. is the responsible answer I can give somebody.
Yeah, we definitely know what you're saying about it being a passion project. As much as Kevin's trying to play it off, we do this in our spare time as well, out of pure love of the game. And I swear, Kevin, you put this question on here because you want to see me debate with this guy. So you were talking a little bit about your assessment of Team 12's kind of data analyst situation there. And they have found someone, so I guess they were successful. And so I'm wondering if you could just quickly summarize your views on that posting, and then I can kind of I can ask you questions based on that, because I'm pretty sure we're not going to agree.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I don't know. I think he laid out a very compelling argument in his recent video. I know Sammy didn't get a chance to watch it, but I mean, he sold me on it. It's a sad situation.
So basically, there's kind of two things that people are looking at in saying why Team 12 should be paying their analyst. The first is they're a professional team, and they get salaries, and they get prize money. And so because they are a professional organization, they should be paying people, and they are a company, so it's against labor laws and all that nonsense to you can tell how I feel about these arguments. That people were bringing up labor laws and illegal internships and all of this stuff, and the reality is these guys are making $20,000 a year to not go to school, to not get real jobs. They're probably not going to be pro players 2 years from now. They're not going to have any transferable skills. They're making less than $30,000 a year. They don't have any money to be giving to someone else. Further, their manager does not make any money. So basically all they're asking is for someone to do what their manager has already been doing every single second, except for when they were with Roll20 when he was paid. Which brings us to the other argument, which is, well, they would have gotten an analyst paid if they were with Roll20, and they chose to leave Roll20. So it's gross for them to have said, we don't need our sponsor, but also we have no money to pay you. And people really need to understand that Team 12 was put in a very difficult situation where they were the best team in North America with a brand new esports organization. Roll20 had never been an esports organization before. Team 12 did not know what they were worth. Justin and Buds and Goku are the best player in their role in any team. Kieran Dansky very well also might be. They could be the best team in North America for the next 2 years without ever making a roster change. They didn't know if they could get a TSM, a Counter Logic Gaming, a G2 to sign them. And Roll20 was not willing to budge on eventually we're going to own your spot, which is entirely reasonable. It's reasonable for Roll20 to want to own the spot, and it's reasonable for Team 12 to not want to give it to them because they didn't actually know what their spot was worth. And and they were only given 3 weeks to decide this while they were also at BlizzCon, at their boot camp, and at Gold Club. They didn't have time to get lawyers involved. They didn't have time to do any sort of negotiation. They had a hard timetable where they basically had to say, Roll20, you can either give us a title sponsorship or we have to walk, and they couldn't come to an agreement. So it is not fair to hold Team 12 accountable for having chosen to leave their sponsor, because they did what is in their best interest, and the only reason they did it is because Blizzard's timing was horrible.
Right. And I do agree with you about the split from Roll20. I do think that was what was best for that team. I didn't want them to give up ownership because I believe it's the only chip really that they had to play, other than the fact that they're great players. And it's for a company, it's like, oh, you're not going to give us the thing we need that's going to help us make money. Okay, fine. Well, we don't want to do that. And that's fine. But, and I think for company splits, they split pretty amicably. But my thing came up when they put the posting for the data analyst. There were a couple things that bothered me, and one of them actually got brought up by another player, and he said, we don't make all that much money either. Our manager doesn't make any money either, and we can't afford to bring on a data analyst and pay them. So we do it ourselves until we're in a position where we can pay somebody at least a little bit. And I actually didn't know that Team 12 was making 20 grand a year. That's actually more than I thought they were making. But my thing is it sets a bad precedent. It sets a bad standard for them to call out and say, we need a data analyst, but you might not get paid. You'll get paid depending on your performance, but you might not get paid. And when it is feasible for their manager or one of them to run the same numbers that the analyst is running, at least in that kind of middle ground of a time where they don't have a sponsor and they're currently looking for one, I'm just thinking, could they not have taken that on their backs rather than asking someone officially in a posting to basically work for free?
So there's a couple of things within that. I think the biggest problem with the issues that people have with this particular instance is that most of us are judging this through the lens of our normal 9-to-5 corporate jobs, where you do a thing and you get paid for it. Whereas esports is really more like stand-up comedy, where for the first 5 years that you do stand-up comedy, you will never make any money from it. You are driving 8 hours to a bar out in the middle of Iowa just because they have a microphone in the corner and they're going to let you do 15 minutes. And in order to get those 15 minutes, you have to bring 3 other people who are going to buy beer, and you probably have to stack chairs at the end of the night. Mm-hmm. But you do it so that you can hone your craft, so that you can get noticed, so that you can improve, and so that you can build up the exposure to where you can then get 15 minutes at a bar that's 4 hours away from your house, so that you can get at a comedy club, you can get 5 minutes, so that you can get on a booking show to possibly be on Conan. And you do all of these things because otherwise, one, you're terrible at your job, because no stand-up comedian is great at their job right out the gate. There is no college course that teaches you how to do that. There's no other way to get good at it other than actually going out and doing it. So you would never blame a bar for not paying a comedian, because exposure in that industry is a legitimate thing. And people freak out at the word exposure because in fields like writing, graphic design, art, it's actually gross to offer someone exposure because they're already pretty good at their job and their work is worth money, and companies are just trying to save money by not paying that person what they're worth. Right. As a coach, as an analyst in esports, you are not actually worth anything if you've never done it before, because you don't know what you're doing. I'm not a good enough player to play on a team. There's no reason for a team to hire me as a coach or as an analyst. So for 2 years, I coached and analyzed in my spare time. The players on my Infinite Crisis team never paid me a dime. If they had gotten prize money, they would have kept every cent of it. Every Heroes of the Storm team I've coached, I've had no expectation that I was ever going to receive any money from it. I did it so that I would learn the scene, so that I would develop my skills, so that then I could be marketable in the future. Because the teams that are going to pay for an analyst are going to get somebody that's better than you at that job. And so in esports, as an analyst or as a coach, exposure is actually a useful commodity, because for the most part, there aren't paying jobs. And so the paying jobs that there are so competitive that you have to have experience and you have to have high-level skills in order to get those jobs. So I think you have to weigh the value of exposure differently than you do in other fields where it is legitimately gross. And I have accused organizations in the past for, I ripped Echo Fox a new one for trying to get volunteer writers. Like, you're owned by Rick Fox.
Yeah, exactly.
You have $12 an hour to pay a writer. That's
Right.
That's inexcusable. Team 12 legitimately does not have any money. The one argument I will concede is I do think that they should give their analyst a percentage of prize money, and I do think they acknowledged that and adjusted their ad, and probably
good.
would have done that anyway. They just put it in the post because they were getting a lot of backlash. But I do think they would have legitimately given a percentage of their prize money if they saw a noticeable difference. The other thing is they don't actually know if an analyst is useful yet. Like you said, there are other organizations that do that data entry themselves. It may be that an analyst isn't worth it at all. Team 12 doesn't actually know if there's any added value to having an analyst. However, it's possible that there is. It's possible that having someone who can spend 15 hours of their week not only collecting that data, but interpreting that data, putting together scouting reports on the opponent, saying that on Sky Temple, Space Station Gaming is going to second pick Tyrael 90% of the time, that's extremely useful. And the players don't have the time to do that, or they may not have the skill to actually be able to interpret those statistics in the same way that an analyst would be able to. Their manager certainly doesn't have the time because he's busy managing the team. He's busy going out to sponsors, trying to find them sponsors, also working a full-time job and having a family and trying to keep himself sane. So and the players are scrimming 6 hours a day on top of playing solo queue, on top of streaming, on top of trying to eat food and go to the gym and have a life periodically. They don't have 3 extra hours a night to enter all of that data in the spreadsheet. If they do, they're not performing at their peak efficiency because they're not taking care of themselves. They're not preparing as well. They're not focusing on studying the replays because they're focused on updating the spreadsheet. So,
well, I guess I understand it in the short term, and I understand why they would want to do something like that. But in the long term, I think this could actually hurt teams. Doing something like this could hurt the teams, because if a sponsor looks at that and goes, well, I've got a bunch of people here who are willing to work for little to no money, and they're hiring a data analyst essentially for free until they win prize money, which is not guaranteed. And, well, I can just swoop in there and kind of take advantage of them because I can get them real cheap. And so it's an image projecting thing too. And I think it's a standard that you don't really want to set, that you do have these passionate people, a lot of these people who are willing to work for free, and you've got players that are willing to work for next to nothing. And I think taking the initiative to hire someone, and if a bunch of teams did this collectively, which Kevin and I have already gone ad nauseum on needing a players union and things like that. But you need to show these sponsors that you're worth something, and getting someone to do something for free is not exactly a way of doing that.
I don't disagree. I think it's just Heroes is so small that it doesn't actually merit the money that's already in it. So there's a certain degree of reality that we just have to kind of take into account, where that's all well and good, but if Blizzard wasn't Blizzard, there wouldn't be the money that's in, like, the players would still be playing for no money, the analysts would still be analyzing for no money, you and I would make less money than we already do, the casters wouldn't be able to cast full-time because they would be making peanuts to do a couple of lands a year. It's only because the game is owned by Blizzard that it's got even the money that it has in it now. And we're still a ways off from having huge organizations with tons of money where the players are making 75K salaries and things like that. But all of that is going to happen naturally because it happens in every esport. You look at League of Legends, and League of Legends in Season 1 and 2 wasn't worth what it's worth now. But what happened was, over time, organizations realized that they needed to spend money to get the right people, because otherwise the right people would go somewhere else. Because there is going to be someone that's willing to pay, and as soon as one person is willing to pay, it establishes the market. So you're right. For this year, a lot of analysts aren't going to make any money. A lot of coaches aren't going to make a whole lot of money. A lot of players are going to get crappy salaries from smaller organizations. But as the game continues to grow, as teams start to see revenue from cheers, as teams start to see merchandise sales, as all of these things continue to grow within the game, you're going to see naturally all of those players and organizations start to pay more because they have to keep up. As an analyst, you're going to take the first job for free, you're going to take the second job for nothing, and then you're going to refuse the next person that offers you nothing because you're worth it. And if they don't offer you something, you can go apply for the job at Fnatic and actually make a bunch of money. And so if that organization wants to keep you, they've got to increase your salary. It's going to happen naturally. It's what happened to me. I don't take free work anymore. I turn down a lot of stuff now. There's a lot of people that reach out to me or that I reach out to them to find a way to do collaborations, and we end up walking away from it because they can't afford me. And I turn those things down because I've reached the point in my career where I know that I'm worth money and I know what amount of money I'm worth, and I'm not going to, like you said, hurt my marketability anymore by taking jobs that I'm not worth. Right now, nobody in Heroes of the Storm is worth anything because the game is very, very, very small. And so if you want to be in Heroes of the Storm, the market is actually zero right now. And so there is no precedent to be concerned about because there's nothing right now. And to get to the place where there is something, you have to do it for free. Otherwise, that just doesn't exist, and you never get that experience and you never get that exposure. And when there is money, you're not going to be worth it because there were other people who were willing to do it for free, and they surpassed you, and now they have the jobs and you don't.
Right. Well, I'll have to consider myself a convert of sorts.
Yeah. It's a very hard thing. I can do this for hours. And I will say, like, I completely understand people's frustration because it's very difficult for people to see a game that's owned by the same people that own the Overwatch League, and to see all of this money in other esports, and to see all of this money that other players make, and to see all of this stuff in esports, and to see a game by Blizzard and to not understand just how small Heroes of the Storm is in the grand scheme of esports. And that's not to be disrespectful to Heroes and not to crap on Heroes at all. Heroes is a wonderful game with an incredibly passionate community, but I'm watching Space Station versus LFM right now, and there's 9,900 people watching. It's not big right now. It just isn't. Yeah.
And I think those are actually big numbers for a main season game.
Which is real bad.
Yeah, I know.
Gets better views on an average weekend, and that game has no sponsors and no money. So the fact that we have the money we do have, we should be pretty happy about.
Kevin, do you have any more questions before we finally let this guy enjoy his night?
Yeah, I mean, I could listen to him give you a verbal drubbing all day.
Hey! I made a couple of good. You leave me alone. They constantly make fun of me. It's a thing.
You supported yourself very well.
Thank you very much, sir.
That was the best version of that debate that I've had, where somebody hasn't told me that I enjoy Team 12 in ways that are inappropriate for a man to like a company.
Oh dear. But anyway, I feel like we could definitely all talk about this in a bar ad nauseum. If you're ever up here in Toronto, you have a free invitation to any bar you'd like to meet us at. But yeah, again, thank you so much for taking so much of your time for us to be on here with us. So, and we'll definitely be in touch about future discussions if you're up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to start our side podcast where we just talk about fighting games forever.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to get your YouTube mansion, just hook your wagon to the Scrub League train and we'll get you there.
Kevin, no. All right, I'll agree to that as long as we can talk about PUBG too. I'm fine with that. Can we talk about PUBG? Oh, come on.
We'll have a meeting about it. But no, I really do appreciate you guys having me on and letting me talk for so long. It's always fun to talk esports with anybody. It's an amazing thing. It's a growing industry, and I'm so excited to talk about it and to find other passionate people that are just as passionate as me.